Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's time to go. It is time to start. I'm glad everybody is here. We've got about 60 people on the call. We may get a few more on as we move along. I love to see faces. I always tell people that, but you don't have to turn your camera on. But if you want to, please do. So welcome. Today is our, hey Garland, today is our second town hall for our reopening that is happening this month. I do want to welcome everybody here, and I want to start by saying thank you for all you guys do, as always, for supporting our school, for staying with us, for supporting our students, most importantly. That is extremely important. And I know that parents are wearing many hats, myself included. So I want to say thank you for that, and keep up the great work. I also want to say Happy New Year. We are in a new year. It is 2021. I hope everybody had a restful break, had some time away from the computer, and that you had some great family time. So welcome back, and I want to make it a great year. Couple things. I do want to introduce a few people on the call today, just to make sure that you know who they are. We do have some admin on here, and I'll start by introducing our program administrator from the Primary Center, Mr. Dwight Hudson. Dwight, you can just wave. Hi. I want to introduce our two assistant principals. We have Ms. Fume Ekper and Ms. Tamika Small that are on here. I want to introduce our nurses. We have Nurse Oxman and we have Nurse Ford, who are going to be on here today, and they're going to speak to you all a little bit. And then I see our PTA presidents on here, Michelle Hatch and, well, I see Wendy with Michelle's name, but I think Wendy's on, Michelle's on here. I'm not sure. I think that's it. And I see Tommy, our secretary, is on here as well. So welcome to all of our Brandon staff that are on here. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to continue to monitor the chat box during this time. I do not read the chat box. It's very difficult for me to do that while I am talking. So please, if you have any specific questions or anything that you want to ask, you can type it in the chat box. And one of our administrators is going to answer those questions for you, or to do the best of your ability. I will stop periodically and ask if there's any burning questions that maybe we need some more clarification on, and then we can ask it that way as well. I also want to let you know that I really hope we can make it through this whole town hall, because we definitely had some major internet outages at APS yesterday. I got kicked off of a couple Zooms. I ended up having to go home. I hope it's fixed. I have made Dwight the secondary co-host in case something were to happen with me getting kicked off or something. I don't know if you know, Zoom literally just erased all of our meetings, but I was able to still pull this one up and get on there. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. But, you know, with virtual learning and, you know, technology issues oftentimes arrive. But anyways, we'll be here for the next hour. I hope you get some more information in regard to our Return and Learn. Return and Learn is January 25th and February 1st, respectively. And then let's go ahead and move on through our slideshow. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about our communication timeline. Our nurses are here to talk about quarantine and isolation guidance. They're going to give you guys some good input on when students need to stay home and what happens if there's a case reported and how to report cases. That's going to be very, very important. Talk a little bit about absences and how that's going to look. We're going to continue to talk about our capacity. We are not going to get into specific classroom and grade level numbers today. And I just want you guys to know that we are still very much in the planning process, but we are going to give you some information that's going to help you continue to move out throughout the month of January, and hopefully begin to answer some questions. The primary communication around who's going to be in the classes and the class numbers and all of that are going to come from your homeroom teachers, and you'll learn a little bit more about that as we move along. We are going to continue to talk about our classroom safety and mitigation. Right now, our mitigation strategies are going to really outweigh everything else that we are doing. So it's extremely important that we understand those and that our community and our students understand that. We'll continue to discuss that. We are going to show you a schedule. We're going to give you a sample schedule today of a grade level. We're going to talk through the schedule so you all can understand how we are trying to make in-person learning just that, is close to a Brandon school day as we can make. So we're going to talk about a schedule, and you can see that. We'll talk briefly about our meals and food service and recess, and we'll do some closing and some questions. I do want everybody to remember that we do have another town hall, the final one on January 21st. This is going to be a big one because by that date, all of our families will know and get a letter from the homeroom teachers to welcome them back for the January 25th and the February 1st, and we'll be able to speak a little bit more on the 21st around that. So before I get started, we're going to go ahead and just, Fume, is there anything in there that we need to address before we start? If not, let's go ahead and get rolling.
No, we're good to go.
All right, thank you. I want to remind everybody of our timeline. This is a timeline that we've been sticking to. We've done a pretty good job to it. Notice how today is January 7th and our town hall is on there. Notice January 6th was yesterday, and it was the day that we met with all of our grade levels and we shared our entire reopening plan. I would be lying to you if I told you that our teachers have had a lot of time to work through this, but we have had to take every little bit of our time. Our teachers now understand our expectations of them. Our teachers now understand their schedule. Our teachers now know their rosters. Our teachers now know who the virtual teachers are on the grade level, and everything in between. So not even 24 hours later, we are wanting to share some of this information with our parents, but we're not going to be able to share everything just yet. But we want you to know that we are working around the clock, extremely hard to get our students back in the building, most importantly, safely, and using mitigation strategies that are going to allow for a 4-day return for all students K-5. Okay? I want to remind you that it's a team effort, that I work very closely with our PTA presidents, but not just them, but also our GO team. And our GO team really has their hands full coming up in January because we are getting our projections for next year as well as our budget. It's a perfect time for that, isn't it, in January right now? But I did get that information. But I lean very heavily on GO team and their elected officials. Our communication plan is to the right, and I always want to remind our parents to visit morrisbrandon.com and then the superintendent blog below for key updates around APS's reopening. Okay, so without further ado, I do want to introduce our stellar nurse, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. We are extremely lucky, but also, you know, we did the work to do this, to have 2 full-time nurses at Morris Brandon, one at MC and one at PC, and they will manage very much contact tracing, reporting, and a lot of our quarantining and COVID procedures. This is not common. This is not around APS because nurses are hard to find and there are schools that have to share and so forth, but we are very lucky to have this at both of our buildings. So without further ado, I do want to introduce Nurse Lori Oxman, who many know. She is our nurse at our main campus and is phenomenal. And I'm going to let her talk for about 10 to 15 minutes around the next 3 or 4 slides in regard to what the following indications are for quarantining, as well as what parents can do before they send their kids to school every day. So Nurse Oxman, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bland. Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. As Mr. Bland said, I'm Nurse Oxman. I'm at the main campus. Nurse Ford is our nurse at the primary campus. We're really excited and we look forward to seeing the kids. But there are some things that Mr. Bland mentioned as a team that we all have to work together to make sure that we try to keep our entire school community as safe as possible. So first and foremost, just before we even have kids back in the campus, as parents, I'm asking you all to please make sure that you go on to Infinite Campus and make sure that all your contact information is current and up to date, phone numbers, emails. I don't think that you can change that on Infinite Campus yourself, so please make sure that you reach out to the school office people so that they can do that for you. Also, it's important, immunization requirements in the state of California will be obviously mandated before any child can return to in-person learning. If you have any questions and concerns on what those requirements are, that information is on our district home webpage. You can also reach out to myself and Nurse Ford, and often Ms. Milner in the registration office also has that information as well. So please keep that in mind. In terms of the when to stay home, This is information that is also on our district homepage under the screening guidelines, as well as immunization information as well. You all are very familiar with the outbreak and the signs and symptoms. Obviously, fever is something that we look very carefully at. What the parameters we're looking for temperature measurement is 100.4 or greater. You know your kids best, so even if they don't have 100.4 temperature or greater and you suspect any other signs and symptoms of an illness, which are listed here, I would also add a headache to that list. Please make sure that you keep your children at home, and we strongly encourage you to reach out to your primary health care provider. We know that there are students who have allergies, asthma, other chronic medical conditions. So this is a good time to make sure that you are in close contact with your health care provider, making sure that those types of situations are being well managed, any medications that are needed for your child during the school day. If you decide to have them come back to return in person, there is paperwork that is required for that. So we want to make sure that all of that is in place before our students return to in person. Please begin to work with your kids, making sure all of the regular hygiene protocols in place with good hand washing, the mask wearing, making sure that your students understand how to wear their masks appropriately. Obviously avoid touching the face, the good hand washing, make sure your kids are getting well rested, a good breakfast before they come to school. All of those things are still really, really, really important. Moving forward in regards to the specifics to COVID, are there any questions in regards to the signs and symptoms? I think that they're pretty clear. They are ongoing, so do please make sure that you keep up to date with that information. If any questions whatsoever, please make sure that you reach out to the school nurses, and that information is going to be provided to you in regards to email. If you think that there's any question whatsoever that your child may have a symptom of a communicable illness, please keep them home. It's really important that you do contact your healthcare provider for further guidance. Please let the school nurses know so that we can work with you and your healthcare provider in regards to when it's appropriate to return to school.
Nurse Oxford, I'm going to stop just for 1 second because we did have a question. I believe you said the state of California in there, and I don't know if that was a mistake.
Pardon me. Yes. Georgia.
Aren't you from California, or do you live out there?
Yes. Well, I had been working in California before moving to Georgia. So sorry. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Right.
Yes.
I caught that too.
Yeah, so please make sure that you do work with your school nurse administrator if you have any questions whatsoever about whether it's appropriate for your child to come to school. Don't send them to the school if you feel that they have any of those conditions. And there's also the next slide we can go on to.
And I'll just say one more thing around the immunization piece. That's what Nurse Oxman was talking about in regard to making sure you have those immunizations. We're not talking about vaccinations or anything along those lines, but immunizations are extremely important now. And our school, Branton, has done an incredible job, and we only have really a few students that are out of compliance, but we want people to know that students are not able to come back in person. And we have students that will not be able to come back in person unless they are fully immunized, okay? Or they've done the paperwork. Is that correct?
Right. So just to clarify, Georgia has very specific immunization requirements. And so that would include either a complete up-to-date Georgia immunization certificate, which is that form 3231, or a completed religious affidavit or a completed medical exemption. Those are the only three things that Georgia would require in regards to immunization. So the majority of our students are fully vaccinated, but for whatever certain circumstances indicate that they are not, we have to have the appropriate paperwork on file. We have to provide an audit to the state. They will be requesting that, and that information is also something that's available to the public through various different methods. If you have any questions on that, you can certainly reach out to me specifically as well. Did that answer the immunizations and clarify that we are in the state of Georgia? My apologies.
You want me to be on this slide, or should we move one forward? Are you okay with this one?
Did we I think this is good.
Okay.
Okay, so in regards to specifically COVID-19, obviously you're screening your children. We're hoping you're screening your children every day for any signs and symptoms of a possible communicable illness. But however, if you know specifically that you have had any close contact in the last 14 days with someone who's been diagnosed with COVID-19, or if you're waiting any kind of test results, we know people are getting tested because maybe they're planning on traveling. That's a little bit different. But if you are waiting test results because of possible exposure or any type of mild symptoms whatsoever, your child should stay home and contact the school nurse so we can get better clarification on the situation and how to proceed in terms of when your child can come back to the school. The Department of Public Health has very specific guidelines on the close contact. In general, you're considered a close contact if you have been within 6 feet of someone who's been infected with the virus, and it's a cumulative of 15 minutes. So it could be 5 minutes here over a 24-hour period. So it could be maybe 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, a cumulative of the 15 minutes over a 24-hour period. There's some other areas where they consider close contact as well, but that's kind of the main parameters for the close contact. So if you've been informed by the Department of Health that you or your child, specifically your child, has been in close contact, they should not be coming to school for that 14-day period. There have been some changes in the Department of Public Health guidelines for when someone who has been in close contact can come out of that quarantine period. And I can go over that. I think that next slide kind of talks about that, so I'll go over that in the next slide. So once again, these are other parameters as to when your child should stay at home. I think we can go to the next slide if I remember correctly. Okay, so if you as a parent have been diagnosed with COVID-19, then your children would be considered close contacts. So we want to be aware and notified of that as well, and they should stay home. Obviously, if your child is diagnosed with COVID-19, they are considered a case and they need to be staying home during their isolation period. All of that will depend upon whether they're symptomatic or not, when they tested positive, and that's why it's so important that you contact the school nurse so we can work together to determine with also your healthcare provider what those specific parameters are for your child. Okay, I think we can go on to the next one. Any questions yet in regards to that? And I will address Mary Sutherland had reached out to me to make sure that we clarify in terms of if, I think we go to the next, okay, this is the next slide. Okay, if you as a parent have tested positive and your child is considered a close contact, obviously you're living with them every day, and depending upon your family situation, that close contact has to be in quarantine for a specific time period. And that might look different in each family depending upon how your family can isolate the infected person, the person who has tested positive for COVID-19. So it's really important that people understand that. And so sometimes that quarantine period for the close contact, maybe the child, if the child is a close contact, might be longer than what that 14-day period for somebody else would be, because they're going to have continual close contact possibly with that sick person that's living within the household, particularly if it's a parent who has to give direct care to that child. So every situation is going to be looked at individually, and we will work with you and your family to determine the next steps as to when your child can return to school safely. Specifically in the quarantine guidance for Department of Public Health, there's been some updates in December that allows people to come out of quarantine earlier than the 14 days as long as they meet certain specific parameters. And it's specific towards those people who are not showing any symptoms that are asymptomatic. And I can just kind of read it really quickly here. The information is on the Department of Public Health website, dph.ga.gov, and I'm pretty sure that this particular update was just posted on the B-mail, so thank you so much for doing that. A 14-day quarantine period is still recommended. That's for anyone who's been considered a close contact. However, individuals may opt out for a shorter quarantine period as long as they're meeting specific criteria. This is specific to anyone who is asymptomatic, meaning they have no symptoms of COVID-19 and who have been identified as a known exposure to a person with COVID-19. They could return to school, and this would apply to students as well as staff. After 7 full days have passed since their most recent exposure, the parent who's positive and that student is the exposure, that time frame could change depending upon the last exposure, and that could be ongoing exposure. So that student may end up in quarantine much longer than another student. So I hope that that is clear. So the 3 requirements that they have to fulfill in order to be able to come out of quarantine a little earlier is they have to test for COVID-19 no earlier than day 5 of the quarantine period. And obviously the test needs to be negative, and they cannot experience any COVID-19 symptoms. So I just kind of want to clarify one thing. Currently, Atlanta Public School is not requiring students that are known close contacts to have a negative test result before returning to school. They obviously have to meet all of the quarantine specific guidance to their particular situation, but we are not at this point requiring a negative test result for students. It is different for staff. So you might hear slightly different things. Staff have been required to have a negative test result before returning to the building. Now they can return and telework. So I just kind of want to clarify that if you've been hearing some things in regards to needing to have a negative test result for a student to return after their quarantine period.
All right, Nurse Oxman, I do want to just make sure that we have your contact information as well. If somebody doesn't mind typing that in the chat box. Okay. And then if you just want to wrap it up, because I want to keep rolling with you. Okay. But I also want to say that Nurse Oxman is available via email if you want to reach out, if you need to ask some questions, and that this will not be the last time you hear from her. We also have Nurse Ford at the primary center, so we will continue to share information and make sure that we have all this on a one-pager that everybody clearly understands prior to our January return. So back to you, Nurse Oxman.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Bland. So yes, I hope that kind of clarifies some of the quarantine information. And please understand that, you know, this is ongoing. We're keeping in touch with Department of Public Health. The Health Services with Atlanta Public Schools is also directing us in regards to all of this guidance. And that is ongoing. So I also wanted to speak really quickly to what it's going to look like for the kids when they come on campus. Every morning there will be a screening that, once again, we're asking you to do that daily monitoring before they come to school. There's going to be designated areas where, depending upon the grade level, students will be entering the building, and we will have staff at each of those sites that will be monitoring temperatures and doing a visual health screening on students. If there is a child who does show any types of signs or symptoms of a communicable illness during the school day, we have a designated care room where students will be monitored while we're getting in touch with the parents until they can get picked up. We have designated staff, as primarily the school nurses, but other designated staff, if need be, that will help monitor those students, so we can separate those students from the students who may need to come to the clinic for medication or other non-illness related reasons. It's very important, once again, that your contact information is up to date, and please be checking all your phone calls, voice messages. If we do need to get in touch with you, we obviously need to do that very quickly. any other questions at this point in time, or Mr. Bland, is there anything else that you think that I should be speaking to specifically?
No, I think we're good. But there's one question that was popped up around if a student is quarantined, will they have the option for virtual learning? And we are going to address that in just a little bit. So I know that may be a question that people are thinking. Also, somebody wanted Nurse Ford, who is our primary center's nurse, and we put her contact in the chat box as well. You can all find these on the morsebrandon.com, and we'll make sure that that all this information is shared with you and easy to read, and you can always reach out to our nurses. So the contacts are on there, and this will be posted too. So I think we're good, Nurse Oxman, okay?
Okay, and parents can also contact the schools. Either myself or Nurse Ford is on campus every day. So they can also contact the schools, and we can speak to them by phone as well.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're lucky to have you. I appreciate it. Let's keep moving. So we had a couple questions around absences and what that means, especially around quarantining. This is new for everybody. We know this. We have yet to put any of this, material to the road yet. So what we will be doing at Morse Brandon, that if students are absent or have quarantined for the recommended time period, they are going to be participating asynchronously, okay? They are going to have time with their teacher on Wednesdays to catch up and to have some one-on-one time or small group time. But our policy right now will be that students who are having to quarantine will participate asynchronously. We have drawn a line in the sand in regard to who is getting virtual learning and who is getting the Roomy and Zoomy. And I will tell you that we do have students on every grade level that have opted for virtual learning, and we want to give them an equitable virtual learning experience. Some of those classes are large, and in working with those teachers, it's going to be very difficult to have kids coming in and out of those classes with other students that are in there permanently. But then also our teachers are not equipped right now to be Zooming with students that are virtual unless they've chosen in-person instruction. So right now our policy is to work asynchronously and then participate with their teachers on Wednesday. We can talk about this on as an as-needed basis as we move along. There are a couple students, demographics of students that will be working with the teacher at home, but also live, and those are our DLI students as well as some of our special education students at this point. Let's keep moving. Empty. All right, so let's start talking about.
Check it, but
I'm going to mute everybody really quickly. Okay, so let's continue with our what we talked about last time in regard to our school capacity for in-person learning. There is no secret that Morse Brandon has a need to the community has a need to return in person. If you remember in October, our return and learn numbers were approximately 75 to 76% of our currently enrolled students. We are still similarly around that number. But the superintendent did state that schools that are over 60%, and there are several, will have flexibility to do a hybrid type model. And I talked about this last time. I want to continue to talk about this. That we are pulling out all stops. That's what I'm saying. We're looking at mitigation strategies as well as scheduling and all sorts of other items to allow for our students to return 4 days a week without being on a hybrid schedule. I want you to know that 60% does not mean that our schools, that we are fully at capacity or at ultimately 60% capacity in our buildings. We're actually still under capacity for both of our buildings and well under capacity. And having two buildings does make this much easier as opposed to having all of our students back in one building. We do have almost two schools now at this point that we can work through. So we're going to talk a little bit about the capacity in just a minute, and we're going to move into some of our mitigation strategies. So change is inevitable. Let's talk about capacity. So some changes are going to be necessary for capacity purposes. These are limited, but could mean a change in classrooms or moving students to a new homeroom. I don't want to alarm our families or our parents, but in some cases, in order to make our capacity documents work, there are going to have to be a student or two students that move from one classroom into another classroom on a grade level. I want to tell you that this is not, this is very limited. This is very limited throughout our building because we've made everything in our puzzle sort of work. But in some instances, if there is a class that has too many students and they're in a room where their capacity can only allow a certain amount at 6 feet apart for social distancing, then we are working to look at students to potentially move to a new homeroom. Parents will be made aware of this, obviously, through administration, and we will reach out to you, through that. I know it's difficult to change a homeroom teacher in the middle of the year, and I understand that. I want to say again, this is not going to be common throughout the building. However, it will affect some students, and we want to give them all the attention they need in order to make that transition go well. And we think that it can do that, but we want parents to understand that there are going to be some changes in order to make this plan work. And when you opted for in-person learning, we opted for the understanding that we're going to do what we can to make our students as safe as possible and our teachers as safe as possible as well. So let's talk about a few of the things that we're doing with our capacity. So first things first, we're doing, if we need to, we would move a student or multiple students out of a homeroom to a homeroom that has less students returning, which would allow for more spread out of a grade level, as well as the capacity within the classroom would fit to make sure students can adequately socially distance. We are moving classrooms, meaning that teachers that have been in classrooms for all year or years before, if they have a large number of students, they'll be moving to a larger area to learn. I will tell you that's primarily DLI, dual language immersion. I think pretty much across the board is moving classrooms to make sure that they have a much larger space. That does not affect your students at all because they have not been in the building yet, but it's a strategy that we are using, using our capacity dashboard to make sure that we have the most space for our largest class sizes. Obviously, class setup is going to be very big. I'll talk about the capacity dashboard in just a second, but our teachers got their marching orders yesterday. We went over how to set up classrooms. We talked about square footage, and we talked about the need to socially distance 6 feet to the greatest extent possible. And that's going to be happening in all of our classrooms. And then also, we're allocating a virtual teacher per every grade level. This is to facilitate equitable learning for our virtual students. This is something that's really, really important to me and to our team. We want to make sure that our virtual students still get the best instruction that they can get virtually. We don't want students virtually to feel like now that they've chosen virtual, they're getting a secondary education, which wouldn't happen. But we want to make sure that our virtual students have a full-time allotted virtual teacher, certified K-5, who can deliver the instruction without any interruption. It does help when our students are not zoomed in with our homeroom teachers. We do have enough staff returning. We are very lucky to have that, to be able to make this work and to make sure that all of our students have a teacher without very little crossover from in-person to virtual learning. Ms. Ekper, is there anything in the comments that I need to address, or are we good?
We're good going forward.
Okay. I want to talk about the dashboard one more time. I talked about this last week, and I'll continue to do this. We are leaning on our capacity dashboard, which is going to be able to show us how many students can be safely positioned in a classroom for our students. This is one of our mitigation strategies. I want to remind all of our parents that community spread, which is extremely high right now, is not the only factor for returning for in-person learning now. The CDC and the Department of Public Health have also said that if schools can demonstrate mitigation strategies and proper mitigation strategies, that a return and learn can be possible. So that is what our focus is on right now. And I can tell you what our mitigation strategies are, starting with, it's really keeping our cohorts together, right? Not cross-contaminating each other. We have our students wearing masks, okay? Everybody's wearing a mask. All of our students are getting desk shields. Thank you so much for your donations to the B Fund and to our foundation for that. And then on top of that is social distancing. So with those 4 things combined on top of everything else we have procedural, we feel like we can have a safe return for our students for 4 days a week. So this is the dashboard. You can just take a look at this. I take square footage and I plug it into the left, and I get the square footage. I give no personal space because if you're social distancing at 6 feet, it's also difficult to give extra personal space on top of that. So that's why it says 0.1, but we do 6 feet of social distancing. I do a 2-foot barrier around the wall, assuming that there may be cabinets or shelving around there. And then what I do is I allot for 1 teacher desk, and then I allot for 4 empty student desks. So when you see the top where it says 25 seats, it's really -5, because when you walk right into a classroom, you want to make sure you're not walking right into a student and you have a place to move. So that first aisle is open and a teacher desk will be on the end. I also want you to know that tables are still very okay. We do know that our primary center has tables. The tables are 6 feet. and we put students on either end, paired with their mask, paired with their desk shields, and spaced out in the classroom. It's very doable, but we are also moving several desks to the primary center, so classrooms will have a mixture of tables and desks for some students. For our primary center students, sitting in a desk may be new, may be exciting. I don't know. We don't have a lot of desks at the primary center, but we will have them there and available to help fill some of these empty spaces in the classroom. So here's a picture of our desk shields. These are awesome. We're getting these for every single student. Again, it's a mitigation strategy to help. We do know that our students will be eating in the classroom, so this will help. And we are lucky and excited to have these for all of our students. These will arrive, and they will be, as soon as your children walk into the classroom on day one, they will see their desk or table with their desk shield there for them. So here's a picture. This is an example of a classroom setup. This is not a Morris Brandon classroom, although it could be with the carpet, because we did have carpet last year, but we got that moved out. But this is an example of what a classroom setup would look like. It's a younger grade, but we will, if you were to look at this for a 3, 4, 5, all of our 3rd through 5th classrooms will have desks, and they'll be spaced out just like this. And I just wanted to show you an example of what a 6-foot spacing would be for our students, and then on top of that with their desk shields. We talked about some of our requirements. Nurse Oxman did talk about the care room, and we talked about all of our mitigation strategies that we are going to be implementing. APS has also provided us everything we need for a safe return through the CARES Act funding. We have had upgrades to our HVAC. We've had our water fountains are shut down, but we do have 2 water filling stations at each building, so we are encouraging our students to bring water bottles every day. We did test for Legionella, which is the stagnant water that sits in a water fountain if it hasn't been used forever, and we're negative on that. Building and buses updating, cleaning twice a day, and then obviously our people. And this is a slide that you probably have seen before, but these are some things that APS has put forward for us and has helped us with. So the basics at Brandon are right here. We've added a few more things in here. We talked about on the far left, the square 1 is the health screening from our parents. Square 2 will be health screening from our staff. We will have an entrance at both buildings, K1 and 2 at primary, and 3, 4, and 5 at main campus, and only those grade level students will enter that way. We'll also have a bus entrance at the primary center as well. We will have a person at each one of those entrances with a touchless thermometer, as well as a Google Doc where we will log student temperatures every single day. We have never done this. I'll be honest, we know that this is new for everybody, so we are working through the kinks, and we know that arrival and dismissal, rural arrival may take a little while for those first couple weeks of school, and we are accounting for that. This is something, I don't know why it says it on there 3 times. I don't know why that happens, so I'm sorry about that. But we input those into a spreadsheet every single day, and we do submit those temperatures to APS on a weekly basis. So safety, we know that masks are mandatory. We have hand washing sanitizing stations that have been brought to our building. All of our primary center have sinks and soap in their classrooms, paper towel dispensers. The main campus will have to use the restrooms, and there are some sinks in some classrooms. We have a care room for our students. We are really reducing building movement, and we're going to look at our schedule in just a minute. We have recess zones for our students, which we know about. Breakfast and lunch will be in the classroom. We have purchased foggers, and we're going to talk about what those are going to be for. And we also have foggers that are that will be used for our deep cleaning on Wednesdays, and then our desk shields. And then we talked about our building access. We're not having any visitors in our building. We have designated hallway movements, and we have controlled building entry points. So let's talk about the schedule, but before I jump into that, because this is the end of our safety, nurse, I almost called you nurse. Ms. Ekberg, do you have anything for me?
Yes, I do. So I have a few questions here. So the first one is, what is the certainty that we will be returning 4 days a week as opposed to a hybrid schedule?
I'm writing these down. That's a great question. So I will tell you right now that we have to put our plan to paper now. We have done walkthroughs with APS. We have another walkthrough with APS prior to returning on January 25th. I am very confident that we can make our return 4 days a week as opposed to hybrid, because there are other things that we can put into place if for some reason the classroom setup for a grade level doesn't look right, or if for some reason we can't figure out the movement in the building. I'm confident that we can make it 4 days a week. I'm not going to sit here and promise it right now, but I'm extremely confident in that. We just have to make sure that we can set our classrooms up properly. If for some reason a classroom doesn't look like it's set up properly, or we can't figure out the numbers, we begin to look at moving more students. We begin to look at opening up satellite classrooms. We begin to moving our virtual teachers back to in person, and then shifting all of that. So there's different levels and different layers we can do before we have to commit to a hybrid model. So while I don't have a percentage or a number, I feel strongly that that we're going to be able to do it.
Okay. There's a question about if you would allow a small group of parent volunteers to come in and help the DLI teachers move classrooms because of the time frame of the movement.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would be open to that. I need to clear that with APS. I don't see a reason. I don't see if we have no students in the building, why we wouldn't be able to do that right now, as long as we get temperature checks and we screen them. I would have to clear that with just APS just to make sure. As a matter of fact, we are opening the building up the next 2 Saturdays for our main campus and primary, so they can begin to get in and set their classrooms up. And I do know that people may bring a spouse in, and we are going to be doing temperature checks on them. But I can check on that for you, and Ms. Ekper, if you don't mind just making a mental note, because our DLI teachers do need some support. But I will also say, we do have support in the building, and we do have site managers and custodians that can all lend a hand, but I do appreciate the parental support, and we'll definitely look into that.
All right. This might be a question for Nurse Oxman as well. There have been a couple questions around the bus. So firstly, they wanted to know if a child is exposed to COVID on a bus, will students on that entire bus be quarantined? And then the second question is about temp checks. Will they happen before the kids get on the bus or only when they arrive to school?
In terms of the question, if a child on the bus is exposed, if a child is exposed, they're an exposure, they're not a case. So that's a separate situation. Obviously, that child would stay home during their quarantine period. If the child has tested positive, obviously we're going to go back and we're going to look at that time frame of the testing and determine who those close contacts are. If those close contacts are on the bus, then those people will be notified. I'm hesitant to give a blanket, yes, everybody on the bus. It's a very individualized situation. And once again, we're going to be working, with health services, APS Health Services, as well as the local health department, and determining those specifics around the specific situations. I think parents do need to be prepared that, there is a possibility that at some point in time, that they will be notified that their child has been a close contact. But I can't specifically address every particular situation in regards to a bus. We just don't know what that bus is going to look like at the particular moment. So I hope that addresses that question. In regards to the temperature checking, they're not going to be having their temperature checks by APS prior to getting on the bus. APS, we will be checking temperatures when they arrive at school. That's why it's so important, and we're asking parents to make sure that that is something that they're doing as part of their daily health screenings, would be monitoring temperatures as well as looking for any other signs and symptoms of potential illness. So I hope that clarifies.
Yep, and I will also say, thank you, Nurse Oxman, on that we know, we're going to know it, and any day now, I'm going to get the exact bus rider numbers. When you did your intent to return form, you did indicate whether or not you'd be riding a bus. So we'll be able to tell exactly how many students we have riding buses, and in hopes that we can share that information with our community so people are aware who is on the bus and who is riding, because that is going to be the only time of the day that students will be around other students that are not inside of their actual classroom.
And I just see another question, Mr. Bland. Is there assigned seats on the bus, and how will they trace bus exposure? So I'm hoping that that would be, yes, something that we would be looking at in terms of assigned seats.
Yeah, there'll be assigned seats. I don't manage the actual transportation piece. That is done through the bus driver and John Franklin, the head of transportation. But from my understanding, there'll definitely be assigned seats. There's one student per seat, and then they are sitting on alternating seats, I believe. I believe that also it does help that K2 is coming back way before 3-5, and and not way before, but a week before, and then before middle school and before high school, so they can utilize more buses to start and begin to work out any of the kinks before the high schoolers are back as well. I've heard, and there may be, I don't know if there's going to be an extra bus or anything along those lines, but looking at our bus numbers, the transportation will definitely handle the seating and anything that has to do with exposure if we were to alert them.
There's a question about staying on buses, if parents will get an exact list of children on scheduled buses.
I don't know that answer. I do know that bus cards will be coming out soon, but I'd have to say that I don't believe we're able to share the actual names of students that are on buses.
Okay. All right. So we have the $1 million question of, is there a possibility that the superintendent or APS could decide that we're not coming back to in-person learning?
The question is there a possibility? Is that what you said?
Or like if that will happen, is there a specific
I'll say there's
date?
definitely a possibility. There's always going to be a possibility. Okay. But again, I don't know anything that you guys don't know. So we are actively planning for a return. I have not heard anything. And we want to make sure that we have a plan in place for whenever we do return. But again, I can't make any predictions on that, and I'm not going to be able to say yes or no or when the cutoff date is. I just believe we need to pay close attention to the blog, superintendent's blog, the email the communication tab, the very first one that I sent. Continue to check that, and then be ready to look out for APS updates. Right now, we are planning a return for January 25th and February 1st. That's all I can say. We have to plan for that. We have to be ready for that, and we are hopeful for that. Great.
Okay, those are all the
All right. Great. So let's talk a little bit about what a day is going to look like in Morris Brandon. Very, very important to me that our parents understand that we are doing everything we can to make in-person learning look like in-person learning. Okay. We talked way earlier on in the year, just kind of about babysitting in a classroom or just having a teacher in there while the kids are still on the computers. And I do want you to know that we are at a place right now to where we think we can have a great school day with students in the classroom, with their friends, with all the mitigation strategies in place, and making the school day look as close to a typical school day as possible. But look, we understand we are in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and that it is not going to look absolutely identical. Some of the bigger changes for our students, and they're going to have to know that they're going to have to stay with their class. They may have really close friends in other classes, and they may see those close friends at recess, but they're going to have to stay with their class. That breakfast and lunch is eaten in the classroom. That there's going to be lots of mitigation strategies in place. But really, outside of those things, it's going to be a typical school day. We're going to make it as close to a typical school day as possible, and that's something that we've worked really hard on. So a couple things. We have a very big emphasis on equity with virtual and face-to-face learning. We want to make sure that our virtual learning students are never, ever forgotten, that they are getting the best quality instruction they can get from a full-time teacher, and not just a homeroom teacher, but a full-time specials teacher, from a full-time French teacher, from a full-time intervention teacher. And when I say full-time, I mean that they're not having to split their virtual class time with somebody who's Zooming with an in-person class, and they just have to happen to be on there. So that's something that we've really worked hard on, and I'm happy about that. We have specials. Specials are going to be 40 minutes and not 45, but that's because our specialists are going to need 10 minutes in between to sanitize and clean. Each grade level, we've created a schedule to where each grade level is going to have 2 special blocks. That does not mean they're going to have 2 specials. That means that if kindergarten, for example, has 8 teachers, meaning that they have 7 in person and then 1 virtual, then they're going to have 4 classes that go to 1 specials and then 4 classes that go to another specials. That helps to limit everybody moving at once. And then also, the big thing about having all of our specials together in the past was that our teachers could have common planning and they could actually work together and plan together. But we don't need that right now because we have our asynchronous Wednesdays for our teachers to plan. That also keeps our specialists in one building. So our specialists have always traveled. But now that we have those 2 blocks, we're able to keep everybody in one building. And we literally have almost 2 schools now. There's no crossover from one school to the other, which is really another mitigation strategy. Each grade level is going to have 2 recesses, a recess block and a lunch block. It's an hour uninterrupted, but half the grade level is going to do recess, half's going to do lunch, and then they will switch. Again, mitigation strategies on top of each other instead of having every kid go to lunch together and have eat in the classroom together and everybody out at recess. That's what it's going to look like. French is going to be a mixture of in-person and virtual, primarily because we don't want them moving from one building to the other. And I'll show you what this is going to look like in a schedule in just a second. And we still have our intervention block with Miss Little and Miss Rubidoux. So when I show you the schedule in a second, you'll see just what I'm talking about. All right, so this is an example of a face-to-face schedule. This has been shared with the teachers, and I will tell you this is grade specific, but it doesn't really matter the grade because everybody's schedule is going to look like this, with the exception of the times being just a little bit different. Okay, so for example, we have arrival from 7:30 to 8:15. Yes, we have extended arrival by 15 minutes, primarily because we have to do health screenings on every student, and we just don't know how long arrival is going to take. We do have a block on here for, and the Zoom thing is covering up my screen just a little bit, for announcements and SEL on there. SEL is going to take a very, very large precedence right now. We want to make sure that our students are comfortable as they come back. It's kind of like day one all over again. While they know everybody and they have a leg up, it's still going to be new. That we have students that are coming from and experiencing difficult situations over the last several months. We know what's been happening in our world. We know what's been happening in our community. And we want to make sure that our teachers and our staff and our faculty really take the time to get to know our students on an in-person level. So that's going to be very important. We will continue with SEL and we will expand on that to make sure they get that every day. I do have an instructional block in here. You can see that it says instructional block 1 and not an actual subject because we are working with our virtual teachers as well as all of the accommodations that our students have to make sure they align before I commit to saying this is reading or this is math. But our teachers will still be working and teaching in lockstep, whether you're virtual or in person. We're just working on deciding what's going to be taught when. This grade level, for example, has their intervention block from 9:30 to 10:10. It's a 40-minute intervention block. And this is with French with Madam Darlis on an A day. And Ms. Darlis will push into the class and she'll be teaching French to our students. On B day, it'll be in-class intervention where our teacher will be working with our students and making up any skills that were missed. And taking that time to not really teach new instruction because every day from 9:30 to 10:10, this grade level will also have their targeted intervention for students that see Ms. Little and Ms. Rubidoux. Intervention for Ms. Little and Ms. Rubidoux during this time will literally be in the back of the classroom on a computer with headphones on because they are not able to pull students from multiple classes together. So that is one of the changes that we'll be having with our intervention. As you can see, we built in 15-minute hand washing breaks. Our students will be washing their hands a whole lot. They'll be using the restrooms to do that or in the classrooms, and we'll have some staggered schedules for that. So I built in hand washing times. There's another instructional block in there. And then right before lunch, there's another hand washing. So this is very specific to one grade level. Just because it says hand washing in restroom does not mean the instruction has to stop then. It just means during that time, students are getting up to go to the back of the classroom to wash their hands. That is something that has to be done multiple times a day. So at 11:30, this grade level is going to have lunch. We have a Google sheet that our homeroom teachers will fill out every morning for any student that needs school purchase lunch. And then at 11:30, that lunch will magically appear right at their door. Students can take their masks off. They will eat in the classroom, and then they will put their masks back on. We do encourage our families to send lunches, only because we're just not quite sure how many. We encourage people to bring lunches. We will always provide school lunch no matter what, but it does make the logistical processes easier when students have their own lunches, but we always will offer our lunches to our students who need it every single day, as well as breakfast. Recess is after for this group of teachers. Their recess is after. Remember, the other half of the grade level will flip-flop. They'll be in recess zone 1. Our students will be divided into 4 zones. When they come back from recess, they will wash those hands again. They will use the restroom, and then they will go to specials. And they will have specials, and they will go to these specials. The good news is that we only have one PE teacher and one music teacher and one art teacher in a building. So if you're at the primary center, you'll just have Coach Patton. Coach Patton will only have one class in the gym. They will be spaced out to the greatest extent possible, and he will have his students in the gym for PE. We have also purchased foggers for our PE teachers who can then fog down any equipment that is needed in between classes. Music with Miss McCarran will also be done most likely in our cafeteria, which is big, large space. Where she could have her students spaced out, but also outside. We are encouraging our music teachers to take their kids outside, especially if singing needs to happen. If they can space out outside, they can take their masks off and they can do music activities outside. We do have art with Mr. Carr. Mr. Carr will have students come to his classroom. They will do art spaced out 6 feet apart. He does have 2 very large classrooms, which is great. And then he will sanitize all of his materials and all of his tables prior to students leaving. I do want you to know that we only have 1 art teacher. So for this 3rd quarter, Mr. Carr will only be serving students in the K through 2 campus. Okay, so our 3rd through 5th students will not get art 3rd quarter. However, as we move to 4th quarter, Mr. Carr will transition over to our main campus and he will provide art services to our main campus students, and he will be replaced with another specialist at our primary center. Another hand washing and restroom break. I did put science and social studies at the end of the day because it only requires 45 minutes and that's a great time to do that. And then we do have dismissal. Dismissal will most likely start at around 2 o'clock or 2:05 to start with. We are not bringing students together in a communal area. We'll be using Google Sheets to announce car riders, which cars are coming. And then we'll use our intercom to dismiss 1 bus at a time. Ms. Ekper, is there anything that I need to address in regard to any schedules that we haven't been able to touch upon yet?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. First question is about lunch. Is school lunch free for everyone this year, or is there a cost?
So we are not a community eligibility program school anymore. So school lunch will have to be paid for. And you can do that using My School Bucks and placing it on your student's account online, or you can apply for the free reduced lunch. So it's not free for everybody, from my understanding. And I'll get some clarification, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Will students be wearing masks during recess outside or in the gym?
So right now, we feel it's important, and APS has said this, that students do need some mask-free time. So at recess, as long as they're in their recess zones and they're with their classes, we are exploring having students take off their masks at recess. If they're in the gym for PE, they will have their masks on.
Okay. What is the preference for kids who are walkers? Would you prefer for them to do carpool or for them to still walk?
They can still walk. Yeah, we want our students to walk to school. If you're talking about main campus, the back, the walkers will have to enter through the main entrance and not through that back gate because we don't have temperature screening inside the yard. So walkers will have to enter through their grade level, whether it's 3rd, 4th, and 5th at main campus, and we'll do a screening there. At primary campus, they are welcome to walk. We know we love our Margaret Mitchell neighborhood. They love to walk to school. They'll just enter through their main entrance. So walking is totally fine.
Will teachers still have snack breaks for students during the day?
They will. They definitely will. I usually don't indicate snack breaks on my schedules only because the teachers know what's best for their kids. But we will encourage our parents to still send a snack, and our teachers will have snack breaks within the classrooms per usual.
Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Awesome. Let's keep moving. This is an example of a virtual learning schedule. This is the same grade level, and this schedule really does align very nicely with the in-person schedule. I'm sorry, it's a little fuzzy. The intervention block is the same. The specials block is the same. These teachers right here, when it's time for a virtual class, they will only have that virtual class. And I think that's really cool that they'll get right back on that virtual, on that Zoom link, and they'll just be dedicated to this virtual teacher and not have to worry about an in-person class. So I do want you to see at the very bottom that we do understand, especially for the younger grades, that following an 8 to 2:15 return virtually is going to be very difficult to start with, especially since, for example, our younger grades are doing independent practice towards the end of the day. So we are going to have to sort of build the stamina to do that. So this schedule does a lot for some independent practice and small group learning at the end of the day, which would be ending earlier than our in-person. As we all know, that in-person learning, you can really get that stamina built up, but virtually and being on the computer for all that amount of time is a little bit more difficult, especially for our younger students. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this, but students will be able to eat school meals that they need. Breakfast and lunch will be in the classrooms. We encourage all of our families and all our students to bring water bottles every day. The classes do have the option to eat lunch outside if they would like to. We have to make sure that they're not where there's recess happening, so we have to kind of get creative in some of those spaces. And students will have a 30-minute recess every single day in 4 zones. Super important to me, super important to the district, and I think that's great that our kids can get outside and get some of that energy out. Hopefully, as you look through this schedule, you can see the efforts that we're making to hopefully make in-person instruction look as normal as possible given the circumstances. So just some of our essential agreements that we've talked about, that the safety of our students and staff are our top priority. I mean that when I say that. Safety around everything else is going to trump anything. So when it comes to instruction, when it comes to anything else that's also important, we're going to look at safety first, and then we're going to look at the other items. SEL and social emotional learning is really a close second. Some of the processes are going to take time. Communication, that we can only have a safe environment if everyone is open and communicative regarding their health. Face masks are mandatory. Refusal of wearing one may result in students transitioning to virtual settings. And there's no exceptions. So we don't take any exceptions to any of these rules. We have an appointment, our admin does, to go visit a school. Potentially, well, if we get some clearance on this, this is something that I've scheduled, but I need to make sure we're able to do this, to go visit a school that we can potentially take a look at some of their classroom setups and some of their movements in a school that may have been back in session for a while. So we're learning from other schools that are also doing it. This is something that we're looking at doing, and I have the appointment set up. Just got to make sure that everything's clear for us to go. But when talking to the principal of those schools that have been back in sessions, they have said things that wearing masks for students is really not that difficult, that there really hasn't been issues, even with kindergartners and first and second, with keeping a mask on. So while we do think that that's going to be very tough for some of our kids to have it on all day, that given the circumstances, that students are really doing a good job with that. These are our essential agreements. I'm not going to read all of these. We're going to be posting these everywhere. We're going to have them on our websites. This is what our students can do, our community can do, and our staff will be doing, because our staff also have to be very careful and take care of themselves to make sure that they don't have to quarantine, which would ultimately affect your students and our students together. So we all have shared responsibilities together. This is a great document that we put together. I love the little picture with the bees on top with the masks on as well. And we'll continue to expand upon this and share this with our communities. So before I close, Ms. Ekper, is there anything else that I can touch upon that parents are wanting to know within that chat box that we haven't been able to answer?
No, we've been able to answer everything.
Okay. So I personally think that we've given everybody really the information about how a school day and how we can do this and how we can make this operate outside of just the specifics of our numbers, of our intent to return numbers, of our class numbers, and any class changes that are happening. I don't want to talk about that yet for various reasons, but primarily also because I want to make sure that our families that are affected by any of these changes are aware and they know before anybody else. They're very limited. But we did give a very broad overview of what a school day will look like. Don't forget that community spread is not the only factor that's going to determine face-to-face, that mitigation strategies, and that's why we've talked so much about them, whether or not we can return. We're implementing these mitigation strategies to allow for a 4-day return, and we are confident that we can do this. Knowing when to keep your child home is half the battle. It really is. We looked at classroom capacity very carefully. We talked about that slide where some teachers have moved classrooms. We're setting classrooms up the right way. And we've really looked at how many kids can fit into that space. I will tell you to be on the lookout for teacher communications on the week of January 19th, that week that teachers are required to report back in person. They will be sending individual emails to their classes in regard to everything you want to know about who's coming back, how many kids will be in the class, and anything along those lines. So you'll get some communication, not next week, but the week after around that. And then on January 21st town hall, we will share our final plan. And since our parents and our families will know by that point in time, because the teachers have already shared that information, then I'm confident that we can share our overall plan by then, because our students will be returning just a few short days later, if that is the case. We did have to reschedule that town hall for 2:15 p.m. and I want everybody to make a note of that. I had another meeting that popped up at 10 a.m. So I just want you guys to know that. And then, and I talked about what's to come on that 121. I do want to say, I do see Nurse Ford on here. She did pop on. I think she was doing some work down at the primary center, but Nurse Ford, do you mind just waving to everybody on there? She is our point of contact for nursing at the primary center, and we did put her contacts in the chat box as well. So with that said, with the vaccination rolling out, I'm really happy to say my mom got the vaccine the other day, which is awesome. That we hope we continue to see students getting vaccinated or parents getting vaccinated, and then hopefully that we see our teachers begin vaccination. If you look at the CDC guidelines, that teachers are part of Plan 1B. We don't necessarily know when that will happen, but there is a plan for to have our educators across the state of Georgia to be vaccinated, but we don't know the timeline for that. But I just want you to know that we're excited, that we're looking forward to this, that really pay attention to any updates that may be coming from APS over the next couple weeks. And I do want you to know if any of this gets pushed back, we will continue with the same plan, that we have this plan in place and we are ready to roll it out when the time comes. So anything else, Ms. Ekper, that I can touch upon?
We do have a question about the intent to return form.
Okay.
If a parent indicated that they would be taking a bus, the student would be taking a bus, but they now want to change it to carpool, do they have to do anything?
I'll say this, I actually can override those forms. The principal is really the only person that can do that. If you wanted to shoot me an email, I can go in there and change that transportation so it's more accurate for you. But outside of that, it's probably not that big of a deal. They're not going to hold you to that. It's just going to give us numbers. If you want to make those numbers more reflective, then just let me know and I can change your intent to a car rider.
Do you have any idea if they'll be running the shuttle between both campuses, do you think?
Oh, yes, we will. Yes, we will.
Okay.
Well, things that will be happening is we are going to have our shuttle for our main campus students that need to go to primary and primary to main. It's just like riding a bus. I will tell you, we are encouraging our parents that if you can drop off your child at main campus to just drive them to primary, it's going to help us out. It will. But we understand that in some circumstances that's not always going to be the case. But we will have shuttles because our buses do go to both buildings. So that is still the plan. And then I'm talking about this. I don't know if there was a question around after school, but from my understanding that the Hive is still going to be allowed and after school programs will still be allowed back in the building. That's handled through a third party. So just be on the lookout for some communication around from them as well. Is that fair? Anything else?
Okay. No, I don't have anything else.
All right. Well, it is 11:08. We did it in only 8 minutes over. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you. And we'll see you around. Okay. Take care, everybody. This will be posted and we'll put it on our website later today or tomorrow.